What's up, Blue Roof Nation? It's your boy Jonathan, and welcome back to Jones Corner. It's actually a special edition of Jones Corner today because this was not an episode I was planning on making, nor ever thought I would have to make. My life's been crazy busy lately, that's why I haven't been around. But I was filming a Frank's Journey, long overdue, continuation of the last episode. See what deal Fury had for Frank. When I got a Facebook message about, did you hear about Spider-Man being pulled from the MCU? And I was like, yeah, that's ludicrous. It's like, I don't know where you heard that. That didn't happen. You're insane. And then I got another message saying the same thing, and then another message saying the same thing. And then I went online, and it's everywhere. And I'm like, one day I don't get on the internet, and everything falls apart. The whole world comes crumbling down. Yes, because really the whole world revolves around Spider-Man. Don't get it twisted. No. So apparently, in case like me you were hiding under a rock, Sony and Marvel have gotten into a feud, and they broke off negotiations. If you remember, there was a theory that Sony would pull out of the deal if Far From Home didn't break $1 billion, and then it did break $1 billion, and it's now Sony's highest-grossing movie of all time. And now they're breaking out of the deal. So basically, the deal that was set in place was that Sony still owns the character. Well, technically, Marvel owns the characters, but Sony has exclusive rights to the characters in film and I believe television. Kind of like how Fox did with the X-Men. Although it was always in question about what the television rights were with the X-Men. But that's the deal they have. And so after Amazing Spider-Man didn't really do all that well, they worked out a deal with Disney where they would share Disney would have creative control over the character, and in exchange would get 5% of the initial money from it. So they got 5% of that $1 billion. And then they could use Spider-Man in some of their films, and Sony could use some of their characters. And this has seemed to be a good arrangement. It's kind of what Universal has with Disney involving the Hulk. Except they're not making any solo Hulk movies, but still, you know. But apparently it's all fallen apart because Disney, after the $1.1 billion, I think, Far From Home, Disney said, well, we want a 50-50 cut of profits. And Sony was like, you're crazy, we're done. And they walked away, and then all this story leaked everywhere, and now everyone's talking about it. I don't think it's done. I think that the story was leaked intentionally. If you follow Disney and their going-ons a lot, you'll start to see that they use the media to get what they want. When they tore down the EU for Star Wars fans, every news site on the internet posted pretty much the same article about how the EU was garbage and how this is a fresh new take on these stories, and it's the fresh breath air that Star Wars needed. It was nothing but propaganda being passed around as articles. Because that's all it was. It was straight, pure Disney propaganda. I really think that's what this is. Disney knew Sony wasn't going to go 50-50, but they put that as their opening bid because they went high. Sony said no. Disney probably tried to force the issue. Sony said, you know what? We're walking away from the table. And so then Sony leaked it so that sentiment would turn on Sony, which is what happened. There's literally trending on Twitter right now is boycott Sony. Like, it's exactly what the mouse wanted, and they're getting. And just in case there's any confusion, I'm on the mouse's side. That ending to Far From Home, I need to know what happens next. Also, I want him in whatever comes next in the Avengers. Also, for Spider-Man 3, whatever the hell it's called, I want Happy Hogan in there. So, they gotta get this shit together. But let's just break down what exactly this will mean and what the future possibilities are. Because there's a lot of people online freaking out, losing their head over shit. And it's like, calm down. Calm down. I know that this is much more interesting than the fact that they're making a Matrix 4 with pretty much most of the cast back. It's pretty cool. I mean, I didn't really care for 2 or 3, but the first Matrix was amazing. um. Anyways, there's a lot of people who think that Sony can't do a Spider-Man movie on their own. Don't know if that's accurate. And I think Sony, it's uh, let's take this bit by bit. All right. Far From Home only made $1 billion because of Endgame. Just like Iron Man 3 only made $1 billion because of Avengers. This movie that came out right afterwards and it dealt with the aftermath of it. It gets you that audience in there. It helps that Endgame re-release itself with kind of like an intro with the first couple minutes of Far From Home at the end of it, just to get people more riled up and excited. Sony is definitely benefiting from being part of the MCU. And while the MCU is not the first one or only one to do a multi-movie universe like this successfully, they have done it the best. I mean, okay, you got the Monster Universe, you have View Askew, you have Quentin Tarantino's movies, you have other stuff that have done it. I mean, there's there's an Easter egg, and I believe Coming to America that there's a little Easter egg, the Trading Places in there, implying that's part of the same universe. But no one has done it as successfully as the MCU, and there's numerous reasons for this. But a big part of it goes to Kevin Feige. And I've yet to see anyone who has his kind of grand scheme in mind for creating something like this. Maybe Greg Berlanti. You might be able to give it to Greg Berlanti and the people over there on Arrow and the Arrowverse, because they're doing their shit too. And I keep saying this. The main competition for the MCU is the Arrowverse. It's the only thing that's given it a run for its money, just on a much smaller scale. But can Sony do a Spider-Man movie without Marvel? A lot of people saying all their movies suck, and it's like, oh, that's not true. Like, let's take it bit by bit. Obviously, we'll start recent. Venom was a commercial and critical success. It was a pretty good movie. I liked it. It could have been a lot better, but the reason it didn't do as good as it should have, and the movie wasn't as good as it should have been, is Sony's biggest problem, and we'll get to that. We'll circle back around to that. Into the Spider-Verse, I still think is one of the, if not the best Spider-Man movies ever made. That movie was genius. Just pure genius. It got the characters, it got the spirit of who Spider-Man is. It nailed it. So it proves that they can do it. But I also think it also proves my theory as to why Sony is going to have a very hard time surviving without the MCU, without Kevin Feige. So let's take it back to the beginning then. We have the original Spider-Man trilogy. Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, and Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 1 is one of the movies that revitalized comic books. That and X-Men kind of brought it back into focus. Now those two movies get a lot of credit for like revitalizing comic book movies, but they didn't. It was actually Blade. But for the purpose of this, Spider-Man was one of the movies that helped usher us into the world that we're living in now. Because while Blade showed us that comic book movies could be profitable, it didn't shoot us into this world. Spider-Man arguably did. It was a great movie, a brilliant movie that kind of follows the rule that the MCU follows. Now, what are the rules that the MCU follows? They hire fans. Kevin Feige is a fan. Jon Favreau was a fan. They hire fans. Joss Whedon is a comic book writer and a fan. Like, they hire fans and they build their universe up from fans. Like, they give these filmmakers the room they need to explore these characters, to grow these characters, to explore these characters, while in a tight tapestry of connecting it all together and building it all together. And it works because the Thor movies are very different than the Spider-Man movies. The Spider-Man movies are very different than the Iron Man movies. Iron Man movies are different than Captain America movies. They're different than the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. They're different than the Ant-Man movies. They all have their very own feel to it, their very own atmosphere to it, all while still feeling interconnected. Because they're letting everybody just do what they want to do. And they're very light-handed with the connectivity. Like, but that was done by trial and error. Because if you remember at the beginning of the MCU, the Fury thing, from what I understand, was this movie's doing very well. Let's just throw that in there and see what happens. But Iron Man 2, and the same thing with Tony Stark showing up in the Incredible Hulk is probably the only time when the interconnectivity of the MCU really feels forced. And then Iron Man 2, that whole movie, I said it when it came out. You know, this movie will only work if Avengers is good. If Avengers sucks, this movie will suck. If Avengers is good, this movie will retroactively become better. Because that movie was nothing but setup. It was setting up everything else. It was setting up Thor. It was setting up the Incredible Hulk. It was setting up the Avengers. It was setting up all these other pieces of the puzzle to help build that universe and cement it into something. That was I honestly think that was Marvel's riskiest movie, and it got a lot of flack. A lot of people didn't like it at the time. You watch it now; it actually holds up a lot better now than it did then, and it's because the other movies worked. Because Thor worked. Because Hulk worked. Well, Hulk didn't really work, but the Hulk eventually, when Mark Ruffalo took over the role, became a beloved character. The Avengers worked, and those other movies doing well retroactively increased that movie's enjoyability. But what Marvel did with Iron Man 2 is Sony's biggest problem. It's what Sony keeps doing. And to be fair, it's what a lot of these different universes are trying to do. And basically, it's just, they're rushing it. They're going too fast. They're trying to do too much, too quickly, and it's not working. The DC universe, Batman v Superman should not have been the second movie. It just should not have been the second movie. I'm sorry. It took Marvel how many movies to get to Civil War? I mean, you had 2.5 phases to get there. Like, but DC was like, we're gonna do it our second movie out. And it's like, we don't know these characters. We don't know these characters enough to care about any of them. Yes, we know Batman. Yes, we know Superman. Yes, we know Wonder Woman. Yes, we know these characters, but we don't know these versions of these characters. Give us a Batman movie. Give us another Superman movie. Let us build into it. But they didn't do that. They rushed the game. And that is Sony's biggest problem. Spider-Man, the original one by Sam Raimi, brilliant film. Spider-Man 2, even better than Spider-Man 1. Then you get to Spider-Man 3, and this is where you start to see what Sony does wrong. Sam Raimi's even said it in interviews. He didn't want Venom in the movie. And the biggest problem with that movie is Venom. I'm a huge Venom fan. Venom's one of my favorite comic book characters. That movie butchered Venom. Eric Foreman from that 70s show is Venom? Come on. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. They forced it down Sam Raimi's throat, and it's the one part of the movie that messes everything up. Because the Sandman storyline, even the Green Goblin 2 storyline with James Franco, all of that stuff is actually pretty good. Venom ruins that movie. Venom makes that movie unwatchable. Venom and Black Suit Spider-Man being all emo with his little slick back hair on. Why? But it's because they forced it. They wanted to expand the universe, and they wanted to do it rapidly, and they wanted to do a big, massive movie. It's the same thing, from what I understand, that messed up Dark Knight Rises. Christopher Nolan didn't want a movie that extravagant, and they kept forcing things on him. And they forced the ante up and up and up. And it's like, well, but if that's not the story that they want to tell, don't force them to tell it. Let them tell the stories let these creators tell the stories that they want to tell, and you'll get some good stuff. If you force feed them what they're going to tell, it's not going to work. As evident by Dark Knight Rises and Spider-Man 3. Then we get The Amazing Spider-Man. And oh my God, do people love to bash these movies. But really? They're not that bad. One's not that bad. It understands Spider-Man a lot better than I think personally than the Sam Raimi ones did. The Sam Raimi ones got Peter Parker down to a science, but they didn't really ever nail Spider-Man all that well. This one, while making Peter Parker a little too cool, but there have been versions in the comics where Peter Parker was more like that, so I didn't really even have a disconnect with their Peter Parker. But they nailed Spider-Man. They were so good with the Spider-Man. The punning, the constant jokes, all of that stuff. The Gwen Stacy romance, because I'm sorry, Gwen Stacy is Peter Parker's one true love. As evident by House of M, when everybody gets their greatest wish come true, and he was married to Gwen Stacy, not Mary Jane. And even the death of Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was perfect. That was so close to what it actually is. It was perfect. I loved it. The problem with Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the Iron Man. The problem with Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the problem with Iron Man 2. And while Iron Man 2 was then rectified by other movies being better and making that one retroactively better, Amazing Spider-Man never got that chance. They were trying too hard to set up too much. I don't know if you remember back then, but they were talking about a Sinister Six spin-off movie. A movie about the Sinister Six? Why? Why do they need their own movie? They were trying to set that up. While setting this up, they threw the Rhino in there just to throw the Rhino in there, just kind of like Dark Knight threw Two-Face in, and it's like, you don't need him you should have made him the villain of the third movie. They were trying to do too much. They got greedy. They were trying to have their own expanded universe too fast without actually putting in the work. And they let their massive universe trump that individual story, and because of that, that individual story failed. Iron Man 2, while was trying to world build and devoted so much time and energy to world building, it at least had a story at its center, at its heart. Amazing Spider-Man 2, yeah, it kind of did, but it got lost so much in the shuffle of everything else that was going on. And it suffered for it. Then there's also the fact that the Peter Parker wasn't... I like the Peter Parker. Like I said, there were versions of Peter Parker that fit it, but it wasn't the Sam Raimi one. And everybody had the Sam Raimi one in their heads when they were watching that movie. And to a lot of people, that was the only Spider-Man they had ever known. So this one just didn't work. It wasn't the same. It was different. They don't like different. People don't like different. I actually like the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I don't care if you don't like it. Which brings us... But so they made the deal because it wasn't doing well. And while we're talking about the Sony trying to have everything and not actually put in the work, it goes to the Venom thing. Venom, if you watch it, it's RoboCop. They wanted to make a dark, gritty movie and then make it PG-13. And it's like, Venom would have been so much better if it went R. If it embraced the R-ness that it was trying. It was written like an R movie and then cut out all the parts that would have made it R. If they had just embraced all the parts that would have made it R, it would have been a much better movie. It would have. But they wanted that PG-13 money. And it's that greed that they keep having of trying to have their cake and eat it too that keeps costing them. I really am interested to see how they do a Venom 2 PG-13 with Carnage as the villain. How do you make a movie with Carnage as the villain with PG-13? It's not going to work. But Tom Holland, they introduced without an origin story in Civil War and immediately made him part of the bigger universe, which did a lot to help alleviate the fact that he was the third version of Spider-Man we've gotten in really not that long a time span. But it really worked because it was introduced in Captain America movie with all of the Avengers there, and it wasn't about him. And the fact that we had all these other characters there, and we were introduced to this version, it helped us get over oh, you're not Andrew Garfield, oh, you're not the Tobey Maguire. Because it was, oh, Iron Man and Captain America are fighting. Oh yeah, Spider-Man's cool. But oh my god, Captain America and Iron Man are fighting. Black Panther, finally on screen. Like, there was so much other stuff going on in the movie that you kind of just accepted Spider-Man and you didn't dwell on it. It really helped it. It really did. And then you got Homecoming, And it was so good and such a great Spider-Man story. It understood Peter Parker. It understood Spider-Man. It got both parts right for once. Then you had Iron Man come in, kind of playing the surrogate dad, which was an interesting take on the character, an interesting perspective we haven't seen on film before, of Peter Parker having a father figure, and kind of the someone calling him out on his mistakes. In the comics, Spider-Man is a character that runs on guilt. Guilt feeds that character. Guilt defines that character. Guilt motivates that character. And we understand that what makes him feel guilty is the Spider-Man 1 did it well, where, he let the guy leave, that guy killed Uncle Ben, it's his fault. We didn't see that with this Spider-Man, but you still get a sense of how neurotic Spider-Man is, because he is neurotic. And you see that with his connection with Tony Stark. You see that with him finding a father figure and just grabbing onto him with everything he has. And then you see him in the Avenger movies and how Tony Stark really is his father. And when Tony Stark dies, that's his Uncle Ben moment. And it's so heartbreaking, so gut-wrenching. And even in Infinity War, when he goes on the space station, even though he knows he shouldn't, even tells Tony Stark, told him not to, it shows you how much of a hero he is. And it's because the MCU, the people at Marvel, they get these characters. They understand these characters. And they tell the stories that service the characters. Not service the grand design. They want to service each individual character. And you see that in the movies. All these characters get their moments. They get things that give them purpose, give them meaning. And I don't know if Sony really gets that. Into Spider-Verse worked because it was a movie that let its creators tell the story they wanted to tell. You could tell that they were fans of the characters, fans of the source material, and they embraced it. And I don't think Sony really got all that hands-on on it because it was a cartoon. I don't think they really cared all that much. And look how amazing that was. But if you do another live-action Spider-Man movie without the MCU, without Kevin Feige, you do a Tom Holland Spider-Man movie without Kevin Feige and the MCU behind it, I don't think it will have the same feel as the MCU ones. I think you will lose that touch, that humor, that personality, that clarity that you have. And I think they will use it because there's differing reports about how many movies Tom Holland has left. 1 or 2. They don't really know. No one, at least as far as I can tell, I can't really tell. I've heard different sources on each saying each. So let's say they only have 1 left, and MCU's not involved. They are going to milk that movie to set up as many other movies as they can to build their universe. And it was Spider-Man 3, this shit. It will retroactively ruin everything that has been built. And at a time when Spider-Man's been exposed to the public, and Kevin Feige and all them clearly have a story in place for that, why would you do that? I'm really hoping that this doesn't happen. I really think that I do honestly believe that this is just a ploy by Disney to get Sony back to the negotiating table. Let's hope that works. Let's hope this all gets resolved because I need another Spider-Man movie in the MCU to wrap up that storyline because that storyline was... Other news, like I said, Matrix is getting a 4th movie with all the cast involved. Kevin Smith is doing and Mark Menarder from Fat Man Beyond are doing a He-Man cartoon that apparently continues off of the 80s, which is pretty exciting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm really hoping that the Spider-Man thing doesn't happen. That's really all I can think about. I don't know. Till next time, I'm Jonathan. This is John's Corner. Give us legends and give us an MCU Spider-Man.